Hi everyone, this is Haytham from horsepowercalculators.net. Today we're going to be doing another simulation using our virtual dyno software. If you're interested in trying out the virtual dyno, you can try it online at horsepowercalculators.net, or you can download it through the App Store, just search for Virtual Dyno, or through Google Play, search for Virtual Dyno Pro. So what we're going to do today is we're going to run a simulation on a 4-cylinder 5S FE engine. We're going to try 3 different combinations of camshafts. We're going to look at the stock cam, then we're going to look at optimizing peak torque by choosing a camshaft that maximizes torque, then we're going to look at optimizing peak power by choosing a set of cams with duration optimized for peak power, and then finally we're going to look at a split pattern camshaft where we're trying to maximize the power band by choosing something that's not fully optimized for peak power, not fully optimized for peak torque, somewhere in between where we can get some good torque and some good power as an overall package. So let's get started. Welcome to the dyno. I'm going to close this. I'm not going to load one of our featured platforms. I'm going to start from a new platform. I'm going to switch everything here to metric. Since this is a Japanese engine, it's a 4-cylinder 2200cc 80. Yes, it's 88.5 millimeter bore, 90 millimeter stroke is how I remember it. So maybe it's a little less than 88.5. Yes, I'm sure it has a 90 millimeter stroke. Compression ratio is 9.3 to 1. Red line was 6200. Connecting rod length, I don't know, but it's okay. I can just leave it alone because I'm not going to change it. Peak horsepower, peak torque, 140 foot-pounds of torque at 2800 RPMs. And peak power is 135 horsepower at 5200. At red line, power drops down to around 105, 110, depends on the car. 110 horsepower at red line. Our modified engine setup, I'm not going to rebuild the engine, so everything's just the way it is. It's a naturally aspirated engine. Modified setup is also naturally aspirated, so we can skip the boost page. Intake system, I'll leave the way it is. The virtual dyno fills out reasonable numbers for your engine, and so that way these numbers won't restrict your dyno run. So if you don't know exactly, for example, if you don't know the exact dimensions of your intake pipe or throttle body, it's actually, on this car it's a 55 millimeter throttle body. I know that, but if you didn't know that, it would be okay leaving it with the 52.5 that was there originally. So the numbers that the dyno comes up with are reasonable for your engine size. They won't restrict your final power output. They won't hurt your dyno run dramatically, so you can leave them in. Any number that you leave the same on the baseline and the modified configuration won't really affect your power output. So things that you don't know, you can just leave it alone, and that makes it really easy to use this dyno if you don't have all the numbers in mind. Just going to click this copy button so the 55 comes over from the baseline to the modified. And now our camshafts, it's an 8.5 millimeter intake lift. Duration, intake cam is about 200 degrees at 0.05 inches of lift. Exhaust cam, 7.9 millimeter gross lift. Exhaust duration, actually intake cam was 195 degrees. Exhaust cam is 200 degrees. This is for the 91, 92 year engine. Intake valve sizes, I don't remember exactly. It's a dual overhead, dual valve. So I think it was something like 27 millimeter, 26 millimeter intake, 24 millimeter exhaust. But I'm not quite sure. Just going to copy all these numbers over to the modified setup. So now we have the same numbers here that we had on the stock. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to keep everything the way it is. I'm just going to run a baseline run. OEM cat, OEM second cat, OEM muffler, and OEM pre-muffler. Click on next, click the copy button so all the numbers come over to the modified setup, and just go ahead and run our first baseline run. So close this. So this is our stock engine run. You can see it peaks and then it drops. that has to do partly with the camshaft choice that they put in their stock. So I'm going to look at the analysis page first. This is our pressure drops page. Most of these pressure drops are reasonable because we use the stock numbers from the virtual dyno, and the virtual dyno is giving you numbers that are reasonable. So you can see everything's green here, there are no restrictions. But if you were to put in the actual stock restrictions, stock dimensions for your intake pipe, throttle body, and so these numbers will turn red when you have too much restriction at a certain point in the intake or exhaust path. I'm going to click next, and these are our power bands. So if you look at our camshafts, our intake cam is designed for a power range from 200 to 3000 RPM, and our exhaust cam the same way. Conservative camshafts for this engine. And that's what we're going to try and do. First thing I said I was going to run a run where the cams were optimized for peak torque. As you can see here, the cams from stock are already optimized for peak torque, so this is our first run. Now I'm going to go ahead and increase duration to move our power band up from being optimized at 3000 RPM to around 6000 RPM. So I want to gain about 3000 RPM on my cams, so I'm going to increase maybe about 30 degrees of duration, somewhere around there, and see what I get, both on the intake and the exhaust. So wait, first thing I'm going to do is let me clear this up. These are about 200 degree cams. So this is stock. There's also 200 degree cams. Stock. Go back. And on my modified setup, I'm going to add about 30 degrees of duration. So 225 and 230. Let's see what happens now. I'm going to rerun my dyno run. There we go. We've lost a little bit of low end. You can see right here. Up until 2600 RPMs, we've lost some power, and we've obviously also lost some torque. And then we've gained some power up top here. We've gained about 12 horsepower with 230 degree cams. Rename that. Just going to click the refresh button. We don't need the second run here. I can keep the stock run and the last run. Just click refresh and we'll get rid of that middle run. So you can see I've gained about 12 horsepower here, and down here 53 horsepower, 2200 compared to about 60 horsepower. Yeah, we've lost about 7 horsepower at 2200, so that would be about 15 pounds of torque, foot-pounds of torque that we lost down here. So it's a significant amount of torque that we lost in the lower end. So now you can see this is a direct comparison of camshafts that are optimized for torque versus camshafts that are optimized for peak power. Just to double check, I'm going to go back to the analysis page and look at my RPM range right. So our camshafts, we can actually do a little better. We can optimize them all the way up to 6200, not just up to 5500. So I'm going to go back and add another 5 degrees maybe of duration and see what we get there. Add another bit, 5 degrees of duration here. Bring this up also to 235. So now we're optimizing both cams for peak power. We'll see what we get. There we go. We got a little more power up top. We lost a little more down low. You see we were losing power all the way up to 3200. We're losing power all the way up to 3200 compared to the stock cam and to our 230 degree cam, but we gained a little bit at peak. So these are 235 degree cams. So I know that a 200 degree cam is optimized for peak torque and a 235 degree cam is optimized for peak power. What happens if I split pattern my cams? Just let's make sure first here. We actually slightly overcam the engine. A little bit. That's okay. We just went a little bit over the 6200 RPM red line with our camshaft choice. I'm going to leave that okay. Now I'm going to try a combination of cams where I'm going to stagger my cams a little bit and see if I can gain a little bit of that torque back without losing a lot of peak power. So let's say we go down to 220 degrees on the intake cam. Intake has higher lift anyway, so it's okay if we tighten the duration a bit. Leave the exhaust cam more aggressive, since we also know this engine has problems breathing on the exhaust side. With a more efficient intake and less efficient exhaust, it's usually better to have a higher duration on the exhaust than you do on the intake. So we'll see what happens with this split. And you can see here we have almost as much peak power as before, 150 horsepower at peak, but we gained quite a bit in the mid-range compared to this red line here, and we're almost as close to the stock blue line. So this is a good split power band. So this here is 220, 235. And this is a very interesting choice of cams where you keep all the peak power, you keep a lot of the torque, so it's not as peaky and it's more usable, but it's still almost as good as stock on the low end. Thank you. And here we see one of our cams is giving us great power from 2,000 to 5,000. The other cam is optimized for 3,000 to 6,000. And so the strongest area where this cam is operating is where these two overlap. So it's between 3,000 and 5,000. You get that fat mid-range between 3,000 and 5,000. And the cam effect trails off after 5,000 and trails off below 2,000 or below 3,000. So now what I've shown you here is a stock cam, peak power cam, and a split pattern cam, but I haven't played with lift. Increasing lift usually raises the entire power band up or down, depending. When you increase it, it moves up. When you decrease it, it moves down until you hit an optimum lift to diameter ratio, which is around 30%. So you want your valve lift to always be around 30% your valve diameter. Of course, that depends on the exact design of the camshaft lobe, because there's going to be the lift to diameter ratio is going to give you, or actually the lift to duration ratio is going to give you how steep that cam is, and if the cam is really steep, when you increase that lift, it might not keep contact with the valves properly, because you're trying to accelerate the valve so rapidly because of the high lift and such a short duration that it unsettles the valves, and you can run into problems where it's a good cam, but it's not really producing the power you wanted when you actually install it in the engine, because the valves themselves can't keep up with moving that fast. But we're going to do a minor increase in lift. See, 26mm intake valves, a third of that is about 8mm of lift, so this is already about maximized here, but I'm just going to add a little bit of lift. Say 9.2mm of lift on the intake, and move this up maybe 8.5mm of lift on the exhaust. Just move lift a little bit, pushing that lift to diameter ratio closer to ideal. Of course, making this work depends on how well your engine is ported, and intake port velocity and exhaust port velocity. Intake lift and exhaust lift won't do much if the port itself is choked, but if the port is working at optimal velocity, this will work. So we're just going to go back and look at what this does to our power band. You can see here the new run, I've gained a little bit of power right there at the bottom. This would be more obvious if I were running it on our iPad version or the web version. We can't zoom in here, which is unfortunate, but you see we've gained 3 horsepower up top. So we've probably also gained 3 horsepower down here. The entire curve just moves up a little bit with better lift. So this is plus 0.5mm of lift. A little less, about 0.4mm of lift that I added. And you can see this is producing almost as much power as our peak power camshafts, but with a lot more torque right here, making almost the same amount of torque as stock from 2600 up. So this is a really nice camshaft combination for this engine, and this is a good way to use the virtual dyno to optimize your setup. Choose the right camshafts rather than having to buy. See, if I had to buy 1, 2, 3, 4 different cam profiles before I finally found the setup that I liked that was producing the peak power that I wanted with good drivability, I would have wasted about $3,000 in camshafts. So again, this is how the virtual dyno can help you save some money on mods by choosing the right parts to make power where you want it, to give you the right power band. I'm just going to go back to my analysis page and look at some other supporting mods that I can do. My exhaust valves I can oversize, I can use better catalytic converters, and I have a lot of pressure drop in my mufflers. My header also is a third order optimized header. Okay, I'm going to leave the header alone. Let's just assume we take the same exhaust and we upgrade to a straight through muffler and a turbo style main muffler. So this is a pretty quiet setup with a straight through resonator and a turbo style main muffler. It's not as loud as a straight through main muffler, but we should see some gain here. And I'm going to leave the stock cat. This is just like an upgraded catback exhaust. Look what happens. Nice gain of power, and look, now with removing the restriction, we're producing almost as much torque as we did stock, but with this nice top end here all the way up to 167 horsepower. So this is a new exhaust. And then I know this car specifically, people keep recommending a 2 1/4 inch exhaust. So we're going to run that and see what if we upgrade to 2 1/4 inch piping. And upgrading your piping is a balance between pressure drop and exhaust gas velocity. If you go too large on the piping, velocity drops and the engine becomes less efficient. If you go too small, it becomes restrictive. So we're going to look at the 2 1/4 inch recommendation that people say and see if it actually produces any power over just upgrading your mufflers. And we can see here that we've actually lost 2 horsepower. There's a 2 1/4 inch exhaust. So that might have been too large a pipe. Go back and go down a little bit to a 2 inch exhaust and see if that's the right setup. Yep. There we go. We've gained a little bit of power over stock. So I think 2 inches is ideal for this setup, according to the virtual dyno and according to the supporting mods. It depends on the engine. It depends on all the other stuff you've done, but in this simulation, this is the right setup. So we started with 135 horsepower, and we're all the way up to 167 horsepower. We haven't lost any torque. We've fattened up the mid-range all the way over here, and we've got some nice peak power. We haven't touched our headers, we haven't rebuilt the engine, we haven't done anything, we've just swapped cams. And we've upgraded our exhaust and a retune, obviously, to make this all work. This assumes you're tuning the engine for optimum air-fuel ratios. If you don't tune the engine, then you won't take advantage of that extra 30 horsepower worth of flow. Thanks again for watching this video. I hope you found it both educational and entertaining. One thing I want to tell you about is if you click this button here, you can share your dyno run. So the image is being uploaded, and once it's uploaded, you can share and tweet it. Also, if you're on a mobile device, when you share your dyno run, it's going to ask you to rate our app. I'd really appreciate it if you rate our app. Tell us what you honestly feel about it, and if you love the app, just tell us that you love it and give us a really high star rating. We've been working hard on this for years to make this app a reality and to make it accurate and to make it enjoyable, to make it easy to use. So if you could just give a little back by rating the app, I'd really appreciate it. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time with another virtual dyno how-to.